Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire and I hope you're having a great day. Today I'm going to show you a fun way to do ink layering. Now ink layering is something that I've done many times in the past in YouTube videos, and I'll link to some of those below. But I wanted to show you a variation today, and this is where you layer white pigment ink stamped images with bold colorful dye ink on top. I just love the results of this. It's a great faux texture but perfectly smooth. And I actually have two variations of the cards to show you today. I plan to do some diagonal stripes on these cards, so I'm going to go ahead and create two pencil lines that are kind of light with my ruler, and this will kind of block off the area where I intend to put my sentiment later on, so I can plan my stamping around that. Okay, so now on the first card, I'm going to use a background stamp. This definitely is the fastest way to do this technique. This is a new Leaves background stamp from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to ink this up very well with some white pigment ink. I recommend Hero Art's white pigment ink or the Simon Says Stamp white pigment ink. Both are wonderful, bright white inks. Now I want to make sure that I ink this up very well and then stamp it very well onto that white cardstock. Now when I take this off, you will not really see that white stamped image on the white cardstock. Of course, it'll be tone on tone, but if you tilt it in the light in real life, you are able to see it. Now since white pigment ink kind of sits on top of the paper and doesn't dry right away, I'm going to heat set it slightly so that I don't smear it as I move on. Now you could heat set it completely to get a much crisper look, but I kind of want some variation in the stamped image, which you'll see in a bit, so I'm not drying it completely. Now since I want to stamp some stripes across this, I have two stripe stamp sets I could use here. These are both new from Simon Says Stamp. This is the basic stripes on the right. They're shorter and a little narrower, and then there's a jumbo stripes here. I'm going to use that today because you can stamp that diagonally on a horizontal card, and there are some wider stripes and sentiments in it, but both of these sets would work. Now I'm going to do my stamping on this black pad. This is called the Stamper's Secret Weapon. I'm not sure this makes a huge difference, but since these are bold images, I'm going to go ahead and use it today. You could also use a mouse pad if you want to. Now these are super long stamped images here. So if you don't have a block long enough, one thing you can do is use your cutting plate from one of your Big Shot or Cuttlebug machines. Anything long or a clear plate would even work. But I have this block that's almost long enough for this stamp set today. It's long enough for what I need, so I'm going to be using that. Okay, so now I need to come up with the colors that I want to use for the stripes across this. I sometimes have trouble coming up with color combinations. I really like to refer to the Simon Says Stamp blog. My friend Sherry Carroll is great at color, and she offers these color coordinates. It's different color combinations that are really great, and I use this as an inspiration for this card. I changed a couple of the colors, but this was my starting point, and I find these so helpful, and I'll provide a link to these color coordinate suggestions. I'm starting with my favorite of the colors. This is the Simon Says Stamp Coral Reef. Now keep in mind you could use any dye ink for this. Dye ink works best for this technique. So I'm going to ink up the largest stripe that there is, the widest stripe, and I'm going to stamp that right below the bottom pencil line. I'm just using those pencil lines as a guide. Now you'll see that that white stamped image that is there will start to show through. And this would dry nice and even because that's how this ink works. It looks a little splotchy there, but it will dry even. However, I really want this to be dark and intensify the difference between that white stamped image and the ink we're putting on top. So I'm going to double stamp each of these stripes. It takes a little bit more time, but it's definitely worth it. See how those white leaves pop out more now? I am taking a dry cloth and just dabbing a little bit of the ink off of those white leaves. And look how beautiful that is, and it'll look even better as it dries. Now I'm going to repeat the same thing above the top pencil line. Again, I'm going to double stripe this with this, or double stamp this with the same color ink. Now you'll notice that those white leaves aren't perfectly smooth. Remember how I left that white ink kind of wet on the paper? I didn't completely dry it. That was so I could get that variation in the leaves. I just think it adds something to it. But really you could let it dry completely if you wanted to first. It doesn't make a bit of difference. Okay, so now I'm going to dab that off one more time just to remove a little bit of that excess ink. You could heat set it if you want to. And we're going to move on to the next stripe. So I'm taking the stripe that's a little more narrow than the last one, and I will be using Hero Art's Butter Bar ink with this. Again, you want to use a dye ink for these stripes. So we're using a white pigment ink for the stamping in the background and colorful dye ink on top. Dye ink absorbs into the paper, and that white pigment ink underneath it resists it slightly. And that's how we can see that stamped image through it. Because these stripes are clear, I can look straight down, that's why my head's in the way, straight down through the acrylic block and line up those stripes each time. It's very easy to do. Now, if you don't have stripe stamps, you could mask off areas of stripes and ink over it, but I find these stamps just to be so much easier to use. And I also did the same thing on the top of the card. Now, you can also stamp different shapes over this if you wanted to, but I really love the look of these stripes. You could even do a plaid pattern with these stripes. A lot of fun things you can do with them. Now, I continued to double stamp the stripes to fill up the remaining space, kind of varying how much white I left in between. I did the green with the Simon Says stamp Green Leaf. This blue is the Simon Says stamp Blue Jay. And then finally, I'm finishing with Fog, which is a light gray from Simon Says stamp. Again, I double stamped each of these and I dabbed the ink off lightly after I did the stamping. I think it's really neat how that white leaf pattern is continuous across this whole piece, even with those bold color stripes. So now I'm going to heat set this so that I don't smear any of these inks as we go ahead and turn this into a card. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut that white area out that we left for the sentiment. I'm going to cut that out so that I can have the sentiment set back, which you'll see me do in a moment. However, if you want to, you could just stamp the sentiment right here into that white area and have a completely smooth front to your card. So I'm just using my trimmer to cut out that white area. And then I went ahead and trimmed about 3/4 of an inch off the left side of this piece, right off the edge there, just so it would be narrow. Now I also practiced stamping my sentiment off to that little scrap that you see there on the left, just so I know how much room I needed to leave. And I'll show you those stamps in a moment. I want to have some dimension behind these big stamped pieces. So I'm putting some adhesive on the back of them. Then I'm putting some fun foam on it, just slightly set in from the edge. Then I'll flip it over and use my scissors to kind of push my scissors behind the stamped piece to trim that foam a little bit smaller than the stamped piece. I find this works fine. It doesn't always cut perfectly, but it doesn't matter because you don't see what's back there. We just want some dimension behind it. You could use little foam squares, but I find having these large pieces of fun foam holds up much better through the mail. So I'm putting another piece behind this one. You can see I have it slightly offset, and now I kind of push my scissors underneath so that I can cut that fun foam just slightly smaller than that stamped piece. So now I can add these pieces onto the front of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card. I just love top folding cards. And I'm going to put it right at the top center. That'll be the top piece. And then I'm going to put the other piece right along the bottom edge. And this will leave enough room for our sentiment to be stamped between them. I really like the look of having those large panels raised up and then having the sentiment stamped kind of set back on the note card. Okay, so now I need to make sure that I don't mess up these inked panels that I created. I don't want to mess them up after we spent this much time on them. So I'm kind of masking them off with some Post-it notes. You could use Post-it tape or scrap paper there also. Now I'm going to go ahead and ink up my first stamp. This is the My Friend sentiment with black ink and stamp that right down onto the note card. And you can see by having these Post-its here, if I have any ink on my block, which happens to me all the time because I'm somewhat messy when I do this, it will protect my stamping. And you'll notice I'm glad I did that because I did get some black ink on that Post-it note. And by the way, that My Friend sentiment, which I really like, is from this stamp set from Simon Says Stamp called Oh Happy Day. Okay, so now I have the You're Pretty Awesome. This is from that jumbo stripe stamp set that I used to create all those colorful stripes. Ink that up with black ink, and I'm going to stamp that right below the My Friend, and I'm going to position it so the Y in My drops between the words pretty and awesome, leaving a little bit of room to the right of the word awesome so that I can add a little die cut. I really like to mix sentiments together like this because it gives you new things. It gives more life from the stamps that you've got. Now I die cut a little heart from a Simon Says Stamp mini heart die from some gold glitter paper, and I'm adding that with some strong multi-medium adhesive right next to the word awesome. I just thought that little pop of gold would be fun on this otherwise pretty simple design. And there you can see all that stamping kind of popped up with the sentiment set back a bit. This technique can be used in so many different ways with different background stamps, with different card designs, and with different colors. Now here's a variation on the same card. It's done in the same way, so I'm not going to show every stamp, but I wanted to show you that if you don't have a background stamp, you can still do this technique. I wanted to use this stamp set. This is a new one from Simon Says Stamp. It's called Hello Friends. I loved all those little doodles. So I took all the little doodle flowers and such, and I mounted them onto an acrylic block all close together. So you can see they're all clustered together right in kind of a circle area. Now I'm going to stamp this repeatedly over this white note card. You can see I've drawn my pencil lines, and this is going to be a horizontal card design. So now you can see all those stamps there now that I have some white ink on it. And we're going to stamp this repeatedly over the background. Now, whenever I stamp a cluster of stamps like this repeatedly on a background, I like to start in one corner and kind of work my way like to one side and then up and fill the rest of the card. If you start in the center, sometimes you get yourself into trouble as you kind of ray out from there. It's really better to start in a corner and work out from there. So it's hard to see in this video because white ink on white paper is tough to see, but in real life, all I do is I kind of tilt it a bit, kind of get my head down near the paper, and you can see it when it catches the light. When that wet white ink catches the light, you can see where you've already stamped, and it's easy to stamp that repeating pattern. Now, by mounting all of these images together on one block, we can cover the entire front of this card a lot faster than if we did each stamp individually, of course. So now I'm working my way over and to fill the entire front of the card. And finally, I'm heat setting all of that stamping just so I can be sure that I don't smear it. So again, I am stamping those jumbo stripes across the card. This time I have a horizontal card. I'm using some bold rainbow colors. This is Simon Says Stamp Hot Lips. And again, I'm going to do that same double stamping that I did before. So I'm using my pencil line as a guide. I'll stamp it once. And be sure to always wipe your stamp off in between because a little bit of that white pigment ink will transfer to your stamp. And you don't want to transfer that to your ink pad when you go to re-ink it. So that's why you see me always wipe the stamp off in between each time that I ink it. Now, if you're having a hard time getting your stamps to mount straight on the acrylic block, I recommend pushing it up against a T-ruler or any kind of straight edge and then press the acrylic block onto it. That will ensure that your stamp is straight when you put it on the acrylic block. Now, I will list all the different colors that I used on these cards below in my YouTube description and over my blog, so you can do the exact same ones if you wanted to. This is the Hero Arts Orange Soda. Again, I'm going to double stamp this. Then I will do the Hero Arts Butter Bar, the Simon Says Stamp Green Leaf, the Simon Says Stamp Scuba, that's what that teal is that you see there. And then I finish off with the Simon Says Stamp Blue Jay. But you could use absolutely any dye inks that you want over these white stamped images. And I just love how those white images pop up through the color. You could stamp the white on top of some colorful dye ink stripes, but doesn't look quite the same. It really looks better to have that white pigment ink underneath the colorful dye ink stripes. You could heat emboss those white stamped images, and then it would be really bright white showing through the colorful stripes. But I like that this is kind of subtle, kind of ghost-like. So I assembled this card the same way that I did before. I put foam tape behind all of the stamped pieces, and then I kind of set back the stamp sentiment in between. On this one, I decided it needed a little bit something extra, so I cut two very thin strips of black cardstock, and I adhered them right along the sides of that sentiment. It just really kind of finished off this card. So I just trimmed the extra off the edge, and there we have another version of the same card. You could do so many different variations of this technique. It's really a fun one. I really hope you'll give it a try because it's a great way to kind of stretch your supplies and give them a new look. If you're interested in the products that I talk about, I link them below in my YouTube description and also over on my blog at jennifermcguireinc.com, where I'm part of a fun blog hop and I'll have some great giveaways. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate you stopping by.